The wind was the first thing that made me doubt myself. It howled through the mountain passes like something alive, like an animal circling a wounded thing it couldn't quite see yet. I remember standing at the edge of the snow-packed trail, my boots sinking to the ankle, watching the tree line blur as the gusts bent the pines. Each blast carried something strange, almost like a low voice woven into the air, too faint to understand, too real to ignore. My name is Elliot Warren, 33 years old, and nothing about my life was built for places like this. I worked in a hardware store, spent my nights sketching forgotten road maps and old bridges, and occasionally drank myself to sleep while pretending I wasn't thinking about my brother. He died 3 winters ago in a hiking accident somewhere near these same ridges. Or maybe disappeared is the better word. No body, no footprints, just his tent shredded by wind and silence. I came here for closure. That's what I told my mother, what I told myself. Closure, as if the mountains owed me anything. The guide who dropped me off at the base camp only stayed long enough to mutter something about an approaching storm. He didn't look me in the eyes. He never once asked why I wanted to hike into the heart of this isolated range, into these brutal white labyrinths where the only constant is cold and silence. I didn't tell him because I couldn't tell anyone, because a part of me hoped, desperately, recklessly, that I might find something of my brother, his pack, his boots, a bone, something that would prove the world is logical, that death leaves behind proof. But already, on that first day, as I stood at the border between civilization and nowhere, I felt the air pressing in, like I was stepping into a place that didn't want me, like I had crossed an invisible border where reason grew thin. I tightened my pack straps, tried to pretend the shiver crawling up my spine was only from the cold, and began walking toward the silent peaks, unaware of how far the silence would reach inside me. The snow had a sound, a soft, endless hiss under my boots, as if each step tore open the thin skin of the world. The cold was a living thing here, sharp enough to bite through layers, to crack the air itself. Frost clung to my eyelashes like delicate teeth. Every breath rose in pale ribbons and shattered on the wind. The path narrowed as it climbed, curving along a shoulder of the mountain like a vein carved into stone. Pines huddled below, dark and skeletal, their branches sagging under the weight of fresh powder. The higher I went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind dulled to a slow, steady whisper, like someone breathing just behind me. I told myself it was only the altitude pressing on my skull, the thin air making my thoughts echo. Still, I caught myself turning often, scanning the slope below for any motion, anything breaking the endless white. Nothing. Only the prints of my own boots trailing into the mist, already half filled by drifting flakes. I kept moving. By noon, the light had flattened into a dull gray sheet, erasing shadows, erasing depth. It was like walking through the inside of an old photograph, frozen in time. The trees thinned and the wind picked up, carrying with it a smell I couldn't place, like wet stone and something older, almost metallic. That was when I saw the first sign. A tree ahead of me twisted nearly in half, not fallen, not splintered by lightning, but bent, as if something massive had grabbed it and pushed it down. The bark was stripped in long parallel gouges, raw wood glaring through. The snow around it was churned up and darkened, crusted as if something heavy had knelt there for hours. I crouched to touch one of the gouges. The wood was smooth where it should have been rough, warm faintly. My breath caught and fogged the air like smoke. I told myself it could have been a bear, a very large bear, except bears were hibernating now, and no bear left marks like these, too wide, too even, too high off the ground. I stood quickly, heart thudding like a fist in my throat, and kept going, pretending I wasn't speeding up. The terrain steepened, jagged granite pushing through the snow like black bones. My boots scraped on hidden ice, and more than once I had to catch myself on outcroppings with numb fingers. The trail markers were nearly invisible under the frost, small metal tags nailed to dead trees. Most were rusted, unreadable. By late afternoon, the air grew heavier, colder. The kind of cold that seemed to dull sound, to press down on the world until even my heartbeat felt muffled. I passed an old hunting blind half collapsed in the trees. Its ladder had snapped. Something had clawed deep scars into its wooden frame, and strips of old canvas fluttered in the wind like torn skin. I almost turned back then, almost. But something in me, maybe grief, maybe obsession, kept pushing forward. My brother had walked somewhere through here. He had seen this same stretch of dead trees, these same dark slopes. It felt like walking through his ghost. The first real unease hit, as I crossed a narrow ridge between two peaks. Wind screamed across it like a blade and spindrift slashed at my eyes. The snow was hard-packed, polished to ice by the gusts, so I moved slowly, boots crunching, each step deliberate. Halfway across, the wind dropped without warning. Silence crashed down like a weight. And then I saw them. Footprints. Huge, sunken deep into the crust, spaced far apart as if something had been running or striding. Each one was nearly twice the length of my boot, with long toe-like impressions ending in sharp gouges. My mind reached desperately for logic, maybe melted and refrozen bear tracks, maybe distortion from wind, but they were too clean, too precise. I knelt, heart hammering in my ears, and placed my glove into one of the prints. My hand vanished inside it. A sharp crack echoed behind me. I spun, almost slipping, eyes darting over the white emptiness. Nothing, just the whirling snow and the skeletal trees far below. I forced myself to breathe. The air rasped like glass in my throat. When I looked back down, the prints were gone. The wind had erased them completely. Night came quickly. The sky bruised purple, then black, as if the mountain had swallowed the sun whole. I pitched my tent in the lee of a boulder and lit my stove, hands trembling more from nerves than cold. The water hissed as it boiled, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Eating felt mechanical, just pushing calories into a body that no longer trusted this place. The fabric walls of the tent shifted and shuddered with the occasional gust. Shadows crawled across the nylon like long fingers. I tried to sketch by headlamp, something I always did on trips, but my pencil shook too much. My thoughts slid instead to my brother, his crooked grin, his lopsided walk. The search report said he likely fell into a crevasse or was caught in an avalanche. No sign of struggle, no blood. But they hadn't found his pack, or his camera, or his boots. I lay awake listening. The mountain made sounds when you stopped breathing long enough to hear them. Low dragging groans deep inside the ice. The dry snap of distant branches. Something moving far away, too heavy to be deer, too slow to be wind. Each time I sat up, the sound stopped. At some point near midnight, I heard it clearly. A thud deep and heavy, like a fist hitting the ground. Snow slewed off the tent walls. Then another, closer. I sat frozen, every muscle screaming not to move. The sound came again, rhythmically now, thud, 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 from beyond the boulder. It stopped. Silence pressed in so hard it felt physical. I held my breath until my lungs ached. Then, very slowly, I unzipped the tent a few inches. The night outside was vast and white and empty. My headlamp beam caught only whirling flakes and the black line of trees far below. Nothing. I zipped the tent shut with trembling hands, telling myself it had been ice shifting, or rockfall, or some trick of air pressure. Anything else. But I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there, stiff as the frozen ground, eyes wide in the dark, waiting for the sound to come again. It didn't. Only the mountain breathing slowly, in and out, as if it were listening. Dawn never really came. It just seeped into the sky in thin gray veins, bleeding through the fabric of the night without color or warmth. The cold had hardened while I lay awake, fusing the edges of the tent to the ground, stiffening the zippers. When I finally crawled out, the world was silent enough to feel hollow. I stamped my feet to wake the blood in them, breath streaming like smoke, and forced down a mouthful of frozen granola. My hands moved automatically, packing gear, tightening straps, but my mind lagged behind, sluggish from fear and sleeplessness. Every time I looked over my shoulder, the empty slope behind me seemed too still, as if the landscape was holding its breath. I told myself it was just exhaustion, but deep down I already knew something had shifted in the night. The mountain felt aware. The climb steepened quickly. The air thinned until each breath came in ragged gasps that tasted like metal. Snowfields stretched in every direction, unbroken and blinding, swallowing all sense of distance. Even the sun seemed distant, a dull white coin half buried in the haze. Around mid-morning, I came across another set of prints. They weren't the same as the ones from the ridge. These were shallower, scattered, erratic. Something had staggered here, dragging one side of its body. The tracks circled a half-collapsed shelter, just a ring of stones and a patch of shredded tarp, brittle with frost. I stopped dead. The snow around the shelter was stained faintly brown, as if something had melted into it long ago. My throat tightened. I crouched, gloved hand hovering over the prints, and saw something that made my stomach knot. Scraps of bright red fabric frozen into the ice, like torn clothing. My brother's jacket had been red. I lunged forward, clawing at the ice with my crampon, heart slamming. The fabric cracked away in stiff flakes. It wasn't his, just a strip of faded nylon, probably part of a tent. But for a moment, it had felt certain. I sat back, shaking. The wind hissed over the ridge like laughter. By noon, the weather turned. Clouds congealed overhead, bruised and swollen, dragging long curtains of snow behind them. The world narrowed to a few yards of white. My compass needle jittered, twitching east and west like it couldn't decide. I kept my head down and trudged. Snow packed into every crease of my clothes. My breath froze on my scarf and crusted it stiff. Somewhere behind me, muffled through the snow hiss, I heard it. Crunch. A single, distinct footstep. I froze. The wind fell silent for a heartbeat. Crunch. Closer. I spun, breath held, eyes sweeping the white void. Nothing. Only my own trail of prints curling away into the storm. I shouted, a sharp, raw sound that shredded my throat. It vanished instantly, eaten by the storm. I stood there for a long time, shaking, until my legs started to numb from the cold. Then I started walking again, faster now, heart hammering. I didn't look back. Hours blurred. The storm pressed closer around me, a living thing made of white teeth. My thoughts looped in slow spirals. You're imagining it. You're imagining it. You're not alone. You're not alone. Near dusk, as the wind thinned, I saw motion far down the slope behind me. A shape, black against the snow. It was standing still, upright. My breath stopped. It didn't move. It didn't crouch or stalk. Just stood, perfectly motionless, too far away to see details, but wrong in its stillness, like a shadow that had decided to stay after its owner left. I blinked, and the snow gusted across my goggles. And it was gone. My knees went weak. I dropped my pack and scanned the slope through my binoculars, hands shaking so badly the lenses rattled. Nothing. Just white. I almost turned back right then. I should have. But there was something poisonous about the silence here, something that dared me to keep going, to prove it wasn't real. I told myself if I could just reach the plateau by nightfall, I could camp there, collect myself, and turn back in the morning. The plateau was worse. The snow lay there like a frozen ocean, rippled and smooth, with no trees, no rocks, nothing to break the monotony. The sky and ground merged into one seamless void. My sense of direction dissolved. Every sound became suspect. The whisper of my parka, the scrape of my boots, a dry hiss like someone exhaling behind me, though each time I whipped around there was only blank white. I started talking aloud, just to hear something human. "My name is Elliot," I muttered through clenched teeth. "I'm here to find my brother. I'm here too." The sound cut off as I saw something half buried ahead. A glove. Black, stiff with ice, fingers splayed as if clawing at the air. I stumbled toward it, heart punching against my ribs. The snow around it was churned and sunken, like someone had collapsed there. I picked it up. It cracked in my hand. The inside was lined with faded blue fleece. My brother's gear had blue fleece. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I tore through the surrounding snow, flinging up handfuls, searching for any other trace. Nothing, only frozen emptiness. I sat back, gasping, the glove clutched in my fist. And then, crunch, right behind me. I spun, wild snow blurring around me. No one there. Only my own ragged footprints and the endless white swallowing them. Night found me again, before I found the edge of the plateau. My body moved on instinct, pitching the tent, lighting the stove with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I couldn't eat. Every sound outside sent knives through my nerves, the soft drag of snow, the faint tick of ice shifting. At some point, exhaustion crushed me into a shallow, fevered half-sleep. That was when I heard the voice. Muffled, far away, almost drowned under the wind. "Elliot." My eyes flew open. My blood went cold. "Elliot." Fainter now, but closer, like it was pressing through layers of snow. My brother's voice. I shot upright, tearing open the tent flap. The night roared in, black and white and endless. Snow whipped at my face. "Luke," my throat scraped the name like glass. "Nothing. Just the wind." I stood outside barefoot in the snow, chest heaving, scanning the void. My heart slammed so hard I felt it in my teeth. Far out on the plateau, a dark shape moved. Slow, deliberate. Upright. Not my brother. Something taller. The shape paused, turned. And even from that distance, I felt it look at me. Then it sank straight down into the snow and vanished. I stumbled back into the tent and zipped it so fast I tore the fabric. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My skin felt electrified, buzzing with cold and terror. For hours I sat upright, staring at the nylon wall, the little black glove clutched to my chest like a talisman. My ears strained for every whisper outside. Once I heard a long dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled just beyond the tent. Then silence. Then faintly a laugh. At some point just before dawn, I whispered to myself, "You are being followed." And the worst part was how natural it felt to say it out loud. Like I wasn't realizing it. Like I was remembering it. The wind had gone still overnight, but the world didn't feel calm. It felt hollow. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums, that makes you think something enormous is holding its breath behind the ridges. My breath fogged the icy air as I unzipped the tent and crawled out, boots crunching on a thin crust of new snow. The cold light of morning washed the mountains pale blue, like bone under thin skin. The first thing I saw were the trees. Several pines near the ridge had been snapped in half, their trunks splintered as if something had twisted them. Not blown over by wind, ripped, their inner wood exposed and frozen into grotesque shapes. Chunks of bark littered the ground, and thin strands of dark fur clung to them, fluttering faintly. My stomach tightened. I tried to convince myself it was bear sign, maybe a rutting moose, but the angle of the breaks was wrong. Too high off the ground, too clean in places as if something with fingers had done it. I checked my supplies out of habit, needing the routine. Food still sealed, water intact, flare kit dry. All safe, all normal. But nothing about the forest around me felt normal anymore. I followed the tree line east toward the slope, scanning the snow. The tracks began appearing less than 50 meters from camp, massive, oval depressions, deep enough that they had refrozen solid overnight. They were not bear tracks. The stride was too long, the weight too much. They were humanoid, like a man's barefoot imprint stretched and distorted until it was almost a meter long. And there was something else, a red-brown stain frozen inside the edges of one print. Blood, old, dark, and crusted. The smell hit me next, faint, metallic, like rusting iron carried by the breeze. I turned my head, gagging. It drew me toward the ridge. Half buried beneath a collapsed snow drift, I found the carcass. Or what was left of it. It had once been a deer, I think. Now it was mostly a scattered arrangement of bones and frozen meat. The rib cage was crushed flat, like something had stomped on it with monstrous force. The head was missing entirely, the spine twisted like wet rope. Worse were the marks, not the clean slashes of claws, but deep, scooped gouges, as if something had dug into the body with blunt fingers, tearing chunks loose. Some of the bones were polished smooth where teeth had scraped them. Steam rose faintly where frozen blood had melted the snow, then refrozen into a dark crust. I staggered backward, my boots slipping on ice and barely kept from falling. Predators kill to eat, I knew that, I could accept that. But this felt like something had played with its food. I tried to rationalize it, wolves dragging it apart maybe, but the tracks circling the corpse didn't match wolves. They matched the giant humanoid prints. They led uphill, disappearing into the shadowed forest beyond the ridge. That was when I saw the claw marks on the rocks. They weren't claw marks exactly, more like parallel gouges 3 inches deep, carved into solid stone. They formed rows, spaced like something had braced itself there, digging in as it pulled the deer's body apart. My vision tunneled, my chest tightened until it hurt. I stood there for I don't know how long, staring at the bones. The forest around me stayed utterly still. Even the birds were gone. Something huge had passed through here. Something that knew how to kill. And it wasn't gone. By the time I made it back to camp, the daylight was fading. I couldn't stop glancing behind me. Each gust of wind made me flinch like it carried footsteps. My hands shook as I lit the stove, the hiss of the flame somehow too loud. I barely ate, just sat in the tent, clutching the map, trying to trace the tracks I had seen. Then I saw it. A new print. Just outside the tent door, where there hadn't been one before. Perfectly formed in the shallow snow, facing the tent. Closer than any had been before. I bolted upright, unzipping the tent and shining my headlamp out. The beam cut across the clearing in sharp arcs. Nothing, only the trees, skeletal and silent. But the print was real. I could see the frost crystals glittering in its edges. The snow around it was still settling, flakes disturbed as if something massive had just stepped away seconds ago. The silence was unbearable. My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to grab my pack and tear down the trail until my lungs split, but I couldn't see where it had gone. And a part of me knew, if it was watching, running would only make it follow. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the tent fabric became a footstep. Every scrape of wind became a breath beside my ear. At some point, I heard snow crunch, not shifting from wind, a single, deliberate step. Then nothing. Not even wind. I lay there shaking in my sleeping bag, the zipper pulled to my chin, my knife clutched in my numb fist until dawn finally came bleeding through the nylon walls. I told myself I would break camp at first light and leave. I told myself none of this was worth dying for. But when I unzipped the tent, the world outside was wrong. My food bag was gone. The rope I had tied to the branch was hanging loose, frayed and wet, as if something had gnawed through it. And in the snow below, leading back into the forest, were 3 sets of tracks now, not one. They were wider, deeper, heavier. I stopped breathing. My entire body went cold. It wasn't just one creature. There were at least 3 of them. And they knew where I slept. I don't remember the moment. I decided to keep moving instead of fleeing. Maybe it wasn't a decision at all, just the numb surrender of a mind too cracked by fear to choose. My body moved on autopilot, disassembling the tent with frozen hands, cramming gear into my pack, avoiding looking at the 3 sets of prints circling the trees like sharks around a sinking boat. The silence was heavier than the pack on my back. Even the wind was gone now. And somehow that was worse. I trudged east along the ridge, boots punching into crusted snow, breath burning in my throat. My compass needle jittered strangely, twitching back and forth as if something magnetic lurked beneath the ice. The satellite phone in my coat pocket had died overnight despite a full charge. When I tried the backup battery, the screen flickered white for half a second, then went black and stayed that way. Electronics aren't supposed to die from fear, but everything around me seemed to be doing exactly that. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The forest never moved, but sometimes I thought I saw shadows rearrange themselves between the trees, too slow to catch with my eyes, too certain to be imagined. By noon, the sky had gone colorless, a flat lid pressing down. No sun, no warmth, just endless ash-gray light. My legs moved mechanically, my mind looping on the same thought over and over. They know where I sleep. They know where I sleep. They know where I sleep. I found the first message at dusk. It was carved into the snow. 3 words etched with a fingertip into the crust, each letter 3 feet tall, each stroke clean and deliberate as if drawn with a blade. Hello Elliot. My name. Not scratched by accident, not formed by wind. Each letter had a deep indentation at the start and end, like something had pressed a claw or bone into the snow to write them. I froze. My pack slid off my shoulder and hit the ground with a muffled thump. My name out here. No one else knew where I had gone. No one. The breath locked in my chest until I made a choking noise and stumbled backward. My boots punched through the message, erasing the letters like smearing wet paint, but the damage was already done. They knew my name. They wanted me to know that. I didn't make camp, I ran. God, I ran until the muscles in my legs felt like torn rope. The forest blurred. My vision tunneled to white and black flashes. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out everything else. I didn't stop until I collapsed at the base of a jagged cliff face, lungs ripping for air. The snow around me was untouched. Pure. Safe looking. So I forced myself to build camp there, because I couldn't keep going in the dark without falling into a ravine. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely light the stove. I didn't eat. I just sat in the tent, knife across my lap, the headlamp beam cutting trembling circles across the fabric. Outside, the world had gone too still. Like the forest was holding its breath. Sometime after midnight, the noises began. Soft at first, like footsteps brushing across snow circling the tent, slow, patient. Then scraping, a faint drag of something hard across the nylon. Then silence. Then laughter. Not loud, not even fully formed, just a thin, cracked mimicry of laughter, like something trying to copy the sound without understanding what it meant. It rose and died in short, broken bursts, circling the tent clockwise. I jammed my fists against my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, rocking in the sleeping bag like a child. When I finally opened them, the tent wall bulged inward. Something was pressing its face against the fabric from outside. I saw the vague outline of a head far too large, the suggestion of a mouth too wide, shifting slightly as if it was smiling. I stopped breathing. It stayed there, watching. Then it whispered my name. Elliot. Just once. Perfectly clear. Then the shape slid away without a sound. I didn't sleep. I don't know if I even blinked. When dawn bled gray through the tent, the world outside looked untouched, but I knew better. There were circles of footprints all around the tent, looping over and over until the snow was churned into slush. In the center of the circle, they had left something. My brother's compass. Rusty, cracked, the needle spinning madly. I hadn't seen it since he vanished. My hands won't stop shaking as I write this. I keep thinking maybe I'm already dead, that this is what dying is, walking through a place where logic is peeling away like frostbitten skin. They know my name. They know my history. They know how to find me. And they're not just hunting. They're playing. The morning was false. Light came, yes, but it carried no warmth. The sky was a bruised gray that pressed down on the mountains like a lid. Frost glazed the rocks. The snow hardened into ice that crunched sharply under my boots. Every step I took echoed, and I imagined them following me, pressing just outside the edge of vision. I didn't know where to go. I tried retracing the trail, but the prints were gone, erased by drifting snow. Yet when I looked around, shadows lingered in places that should have been empty. I had no choice but to keep climbing. By noon, I reached a narrow canyon. The walls rose high, jagged, cutting off all light except the dull gray overhead. Snow and ice formed spires that jutted like broken teeth. My boots skated across hidden sheets of ice. Every sound, the scrape of my pack, the hiss of my breath, felt deafening. That's when I saw the first movement. A shadow shifted across the far wall, massive, hunched. My heart froze. I grabbed my binoculars with trembling hands. It was a Yeti. Bigger than any human, covered in coarse white fur, matted with ice and blood. Its head tilted as it studied me with dark, intelligent eyes. Long claws dug shallow trenches in the snow as it stepped forward, each movement deliberate, precise, almost predatory. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to scream and bolt, but my legs refused to obey. My body felt anchored, trapped in terror. The Yeti stopped 100 feet away. It cocked its head like a curious child, or a predator savoring a cornered prey. Then it roared. The sound was worse than I imagined. Not just a roar, but a rumbling, bone-shaking scream that vibrated through the canyon walls, through my chest, my teeth, my very bones. It reverberated across the snow, stirring flakes into clouds that burned my eyes. I fell backward, slipping on ice, scraping my palms. The roar didn't stop. It grew in intensity, almost mocking, then abruptly ceased. Silence. And then the forest seemed to move. The Yeti advanced slowly, walking upright, then crouching to crawl low like it was studying the angle of attack. Its breath came out in clouds tinged with frost and a faint coppery scent, blood. It smelled like death. It stopped again, head tilted, and then howled, a high, long, haunting sound that echoed off the canyon walls. I realized, trembling, that it was calling someone or something. I backed away carefully, but my foot hit a thin patch of ice. My body spun, flailing, and I landed face first in the snow. My hands scraped against the frozen ground, tearing at the crust. The Yeti took a single step toward me, one step. My mind blanked. I couldn't process, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then I saw its hands. They were enormous, but not just hands. They had fingers that bent wrong, claws sharp enough to pierce metal, fur matted with dark stains. I realized with horror that the stains were blood, fresh blood. Something in me broke. I scrambled backward, kicking my pack into place, shoving the straps over my shoulders. The Yeti tilted its head again, watching, calculating, amused. I ran. The canyon narrowed. Snow clung to the walls, icy spires threatening to fall with every gust of wind. The Yeti followed, silent now, a stalking shadow. Then I saw the first human victim. Half buried in snow, twisted grotesquely around a jagged rock. The body was mutilated, the ribs crushed, the face unrecognizable. Dark stains soaked into the snow around it, frozen now in place. I vomited, stumbling backward, then pushed myself forward. The Yeti made no sound. It merely followed, stepping over the corpse as if ignoring it. Intelligent, calculated. I realized then this wasn't just an animal. It wasn't mindless. It knew what it was doing. It knew me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I ran through cliffs and snowfields, each step pushing my body to the brink. The creature was always just behind, never striking, yet the threat of violence was constant. Every snapped branch, every falling flake, every shadow made me jump. At one point, I slipped and nearly fell down a sheer slope. The Yeti appeared at the top, crouched and watching, its dark eyes shining with something like satisfaction. I scrambled up, ice cutting into my palms, and it waited, as if teaching me a lesson. I realized, panting and bleeding, that it wasn't chasing me to eat me. Not yet. It was toying with me, and I had no idea why. By nightfall, I found a small cave, shallow but enough to block wind. My legs were shaking violently, my hands raw from scraping ice and rocks. I dragged myself inside, huddling against the wall. Outside, I heard movement, soft, deliberate steps circling the cave. The snow shifted, then a low rumble like it was laughing at me. I pressed my face to the rock wall. My lips moved silently, praying, bargaining, trying to make sense of any logic in what was happening. Then it spoke. A low, guttural voice, distorted by snow and distance, but clear enough to recognize words. "Elliot, come play." I didn't answer, I couldn't. And I realized in that bone-deep cold that if I left the cave, it would kill me. If I stayed, it would watch. I was trapped. Hours later, I thought I saw it again, two dark shapes, taller than men, silhouetted against the icy walls of the canyon, standing upright and motionless, watching me, calculating, waiting. I understood then. The Yeti weren't mindless beasts. They were predators with intent, intelligence, and cruelty. And I was their prey. My only thought, repeated over and over like a mantra. Survive, survive, survive. The cave was smaller than I thought. A shallow hollow, barely enough to crouch, and yet somehow it felt like the mountain had swallowed me whole. The walls were jagged, icy, and wet with condensation. Each droplet that fell echoed like gunshots in my skull. The air was stale and sharp, carrying the faint coppery scent of blood from outside. I pressed myself into the corner, huddled like a child, hands over my ears. My knife was clutched tightly, but I knew it was useless against what waited beyond the entrance. And it was waiting. The first sound was subtle. A dragging, scraping rhythm moving over rocks and ice. It circled the cave slowly, deliberately. My breath froze in my lungs. Then a sharp bang, as if something heavy had struck the wall. Dust and frost fell, coating my hair and shoulders. I pressed my face against the cold rock, willing it to go away. It didn't. I peeked around the edge of the hollow. Two shapes crouched outside, taller than men, fur matted with ice and blood, claws scraping against stone. Their eyes glinted black in the dim light. I saw the first signs of gore. A small animal, or maybe something larger, was impaled on a jagged rock, torn apart. The snow around it was churned into red, frozen spikes jutting from the ground. One of the creatures leaned down and pulled at a strip of frozen flesh with its clawed hands. It ate slowly, deliberately, making a faint slurping sound that burned into my ears. The other turned its head toward me, and I realized with horror that it knew I was there. Not just sensed, knew. I stumbled backward into the cave, heart hammering. My foot caught a loose rock, sending it clattering against the wall. The sound echoed. The creatures froze. Then the one closest to the cave entrance charged. I didn't have time to react. Its claws tore through the cave mouth, scraping the walls, sending shards of ice flying. Its head bent low, eyes locked on me. The smell of wet fur and copper filled the air. I slashed with my knife, but it bounced uselessly off the thick ice. The creature snarled, a guttural, ear-shattering sound, and lunged again. I spun, slipping on ice, and ran deeper into the hollow. The cave twisted and narrowed. Ice stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and the walls pressed in as if alive. I scraped my hands and knees, bleeding on the frozen floor, my breath visible in choking clouds. Behind me, the creature pounded on the walls, following relentlessly. Each strike shook the hollow, sending icicles crashing to the floor. I rounded a bend and found myself in a small chamber. The chamber was filled with frozen bodies. At first I thought it was animal, then I saw the shapes. Humans. Frozen, mangled, some missing limbs, their faces twisted in terror. Blood was partially frozen, partially melted into puddles of dark, congealed horror. I vomited. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to be invisible, hands over my mouth. The creature entered. It crouched low, sniffing the chamber, claws scraping against the ice. It moved with deliberate intelligence, circling the bodies, occasionally tapping or prodding them. One I recognized immediately, half covered by frost. It had been alive recently, the body warm enough to smell copper through the ice. It let out a deep growl, almost contemplative, and moved on. I realized I couldn't breathe too loud, couldn't move, couldn't exist. Hours passed. I don't know how long. Time was fractured, measured only by the sound of claws scraping ice outside the chamber. My hands were raw, my knees bleeding. My stomach ached from hunger and terror. Then movement. Not outside, inside. Something shifted in the shadows of the chamber. My headlamp caught a glint eyes. Another Yeti, smaller, hunched low, dragging a frozen body across the floor. Its claws tore at the flesh, scattering frost and blood. I gagged. It didn't notice me. It didn't need to. I could smell it, blood, fur, ice. Its breath fogged the air around me. I realized with sudden clarity I had walked into their den. And they didn't like intruders. I scrambled backward, trying to find a narrow fissure I had seen earlier. The smaller creature looked up, its head tilted, then it snarled. The larger one outside began pounding the entrance again, sending chunks of ice crashing down. Dust and shards filled the chamber, stinging my eyes and lungs. I couldn't hide, I couldn't fight. I ran. The fissure led to an even narrower tunnel, twisting downwards, ice walls scraping my shoulders. I had to crawl on my stomach, knife clutched in one hand, bleeding, gasping. Behind me, the scraping followed, closer now, deliberate, each step sending a tremor through the frozen stone. I saw a shadow leap over the wall. Its eyes caught the light for a fraction of a second, dark, intelligent, malevolent. I screamed. Something lunged at me. My shoulder caught a claw, slicing through my jacket and tearing into flesh. I felt the cold shock of metal and ice meet raw muscle. Pain exploded in my arm, white hot and burning. I bit down on my fist to keep from screaming. I stumbled, clawing at ice, slipping into a shallow pool of frozen water. The creature hesitated for just a heartbeat. Then it retreated. Not gone, just observing, waiting. I realized I was still alive, somehow, but only barely. Blood dripped from my shoulder, staining the ice. My legs were numb. My lungs burned. My mind reeled in fragmented loops of fear. And all the while I knew they weren't finished. Hours later, huddled in a narrow crevice barely large enough to fit my body, I tried to think. They weren't animals. They weren't mindless. They were intelligent predators, hunting, toying, observing, and I was the newest addition to their collection. The cave walls pressed in, the icy ground cutting into my knees, the scent of blood and fur heavy in the air. I understood then that survival wasn't enough. Survival was only temporary. Because out there, in the snow and shadow, they were patient. And I was already their prey. The morning light was muted, gray as old ash. I crawled out of the narrow fissure, every muscle screaming, lungs burning. My shoulder throbbed from the deep claw wound, now stiff with frozen blood. Snow clung to my soaked clothes, coating me in icy crystals that stung like fire. I didn't know where I was, only that the path forward was death and the path backward was death. The Yetis were out there somewhere, watching, waiting, and I had begun to understand something terrifying. They knew how I thought. The first clue came as I crested a ridge. I froze. The snow ahead was covered in footprints, but not just any footprints. Mine. Every set I had made since leaving the plateau was there, rearranged, overlapped, mutilated, like someone had been mocking me. I pressed my gloved hands into the snow, realizing they had studied my trail and planned their pursuit. I didn't move for long minutes. Then I heard it. A snapping branch behind me. I spun, but the slope was empty. Snow fell from a tree far above, scattering like sparks. I started moving, low and fast, trying to stay out of sight. The forest became a maze of terror. Every tree seemed positioned to trap me, every rock angled to block escape. The Yetis were not chasing blindly. They were driving me, herding me like game. Branches scraped my face. Icicles fell with tiny shattering crashes. My boots tore through crusted snow, leaving false trails they could read. I stumbled upon another scene of carnage. A frozen carcass, human, barely recognizable, was impaled across a tree branch. Arms hung uselessly, head twisted at an impossible angle. Blood had stained the bark and frozen into spikes, catching in the morning light. One foot still had a boot, the other bare. I gagged, every nerve in my body screamed. And I realized the creatures were leaving a warning. I was next. By midday, exhaustion and terror merged. My mind raced, fragmented, imagining footsteps that weren't there, hearing whispers of my own name in the wind. Then I found the trap. The snow ahead was a thin crust, hiding a gaping hole beneath it. I stepped carefully, but the snow collapsed underfoot, plunging me into a pit filled with frozen spikes. I twisted, landing awkwardly on my side, scraping my back and legs, blood mixing with snow. The hole was too deep to climb. I could see shadows circling the edge, hulking shapes, their eyes black and intelligent, studying me. I scrambled against the icy walls, fingers raw, until I barely managed to hook a ledge and pull myself out. The shapes disappeared before I reached the top. They had wanted me to fall. Hours passed in a haze of panic. I tried to hide in a hollowed-out grove, using fallen branches and snow as cover. My shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, my legs ached. My lungs were raw from cold and exertion. And then I saw movement on the snow. A circle had been cleared around me, trampled flat, smooth. In the center, they had left something. A severed limb, frozen, dark with dried blood. It was human. I didn't recognize it at first. Then the memory clicked. A villager from a remote cabin I'd passed days ago. His disappearance had seemed minor, irrelevant, but here was the proof. They were killing with precision, intelligence, and malice. I ran. The forest twisted, narrow paths, cliffs, and ice fields, but no matter which direction I turned, I felt their eyes. They weren't just following, they were anticipating my choices. Rocks that could be used to climb were shifted, snow patches that seemed safe were hollow beneath. Every instinct I had was weaponized against me. Then I heard the sound, a low, dragging groan like a human cry, distorted and extended. My stomach turned. They had left a sound trap. They had dragged a corpse just beyond the trees, positioning it to manipulate my fear. I stumbled, fell, and vomited. The snow beneath me was slick with frozen blood. And in that moment I realized this forest was alive. It had become an extension of their will. Even as exhaustion gnawed at me, I noticed patterns. The Yetis weren't mindless predators. They planned attacks, manipulated terrain, set psychological traps. One would appear briefly, then vanish, only for another to appear along a false trail. The snow was their canvas, blood their paint, and I the centerpiece. I caught glimpses, massive shapes crouched atop cliffs, matted white fur blending with snow, eyes black and unblinking. The glint of teeth where ice reflected the sunlight. They observed my panic, hesitation, and dread like a teacher grading a student. And every time I slowed, they moved closer. The afternoon collapsed into night. I found a small, hollowed-out cliffside, partially protected by rocks. I crouched, exhausted, shivering, bleeding from multiple scratches, trying to remain invisible. Then I heard the whisper of my name again. Elliot. Closer this time. Not outside, inside the hollow. I froze. The shadows shifted. One of them, larger than the rest, was crouched just beyond the rocks, partially obscured, its black eyes glinting. I could see its breath, clouding the icy air, mingled with the coppery smell of blood. It stepped closer, and I realized the games had escalated. They weren't waiting to strike. They were teaching me terror. Hours passed with me pressed against the rock, knife clutched, vision darting from shadow to shadow. The forest around me was silent, except for soft scraping, breathing, and the faint slurping of frozen blood from unseen carcasses. And in the middle of the night, I understood a terrifying truth. They weren't hunting to eat. They weren't hunting to kill immediately. They hunted to break you, to teach you fear, to make you forget what is real and what is imagination. And they were succeeding. I shivered uncontrollably, huddled against ice. My mind spun with images of corpses, claw marks, rearranged tracks, whispers, and eyes in the dark. I was alone, and yet never alone. The snow had turned to slush, clinging to my boots, freezing my toes and ankles. My shoulder throbbed relentlessly, every heartbeat sending shocks of pain down my arm. My lungs burned with each gasp, my stomach a tight knot of panic and hunger. I had to move. I couldn't stay, not another hour, not another second. I bolted from the hollowed cliffside just before dawn, hopping to outrun them in the half-light. Every step was agony. Ice cut into my palms as I clawed at snow for balance. My vision was blurred from fatigue and tears. The forest around me seemed alive, whispering my name, shifting, folding over itself. I stumbled upon another trap, a pit hidden beneath thin snow, lined with jagged icicles sharpened into cruel points. I fell halfway in, scraping my legs and abdomen, ripping my jacket and shredding my gloves. Above me, the Yetis watched. I could feel their eyes, cold and patient, observing my struggle. I climbed out and ran blindly into a dense forest of evergreens. Branches lashed at my face, ice tore at my hair. My shoulder was sticky with frozen blood. Then I saw movement, the first of them stepping between trees, larger than any man, fur matted with ice and gore, anticipating my path, almost enjoying my struggle. It raised a massive hand and pointed in the direction I was heading. I realized in that moment of horrific clarity, they were orchestrating this. I tripped over something hard in the snow. A human skull, cracked, half-buried, teeth exposed. I stumbled back, gagging, and almost fell again. Blood was everywhere, frozen on branches, trailing like rivers across the ground. Then I heard them, chattering, low and guttural, behind me and to my left. Multiple voices, inhuman but intelligible, murmuring my name, whispering threats I could barely comprehend. I ran faster. The path led to a steep incline, cliffs on one side, a frozen creek on the other. Ice slicked over everything. I slipped, arms flailing, crashing into rocks. Pain exploded through my ribs. My vision tunneled. I thought I saw one of them lunge. It wasn't moving yet, it was waiting. I scrambled, clawing at ice, scraping my knees and hands raw. The forest around me warped, snow shifting unnaturally under my steps, every branch angled to trip me, every shadow twisted into threatening shapes. I realized then, the Yetis manipulated the environment, turning the mountain itself against me. At the top of the ridge, I saw a small cabin, abandoned but standing. It was my only hope. I ran. The first Yeti charged from the tree line. Its roar shook the mountain. I leapt, slid on ice, crashing through a fallen tree, scraping my arms. I entered the cabin, slamming the door. Inside, it was darkness and dust. Broken furniture, shattered glass, bloodstains. A sense of previous horror lingered in the air. I barricaded the door with a table and a chair, shoving anything heavy I could find against it. And I realized, as I slid to the floor in trembling exhaustion, that they would not stop. The night was endless. Scrapes on the roof, claws raking the walls, the sound of splintering wood. I could hear them breathing, whispering my name, their intelligence now obvious in every movement. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every shadow became a threat, every gust of wind a signal of attack. At some point, I vomited again, the stench of blood and decay in my nose. Then I saw it. Through a crack in the wall, eyes black and unblinking watching me. The largest one. Its breath fogged the window. I could see the curve of its mouth, sharp teeth glinting faintly in the dim light. I realized with horror that it was smiling. Dawn came with muted gray light. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. My shoulder was numb, my arms scraped raw, my legs trembling. I had to leave. I couldn't stay. I made for the back door. Then I saw the trail. Bodies, human bodies, arranged in a grotesque line, frozen in the snow like grotesque markers pointing toward the exit. Limbs twisted, faces frozen in terror, some missing eyes, some missing jaws, blood everywhere, congealed and spattered. I stumbled back, almost fainting. And then I understood, this was a warning. Leave or join them. I ran into the forest, moving blindly down the slope. Snow and ice tore at me. My lungs were raw, my vision blurred. The Yetis were everywhere, not just chasing but anticipating. One appeared at the base of a tree, blocking a path. Another crouched on a ridge above, ready to strike. I zigzagged, trying to throw them off, but it was hopeless. I tripped over roots and rocks, slamming my head against ice. Pain exploded. My hands were useless, my boots filled with snow and blood. Then I reached the frozen creek. The ice was thin, cracking under my weight. I had no choice. I ran. It broke. I plunged into freezing water, gasping, choking, snow and ice in my mouth. My arms flailed. My shoulder burned. The creatures didn't follow immediately. For a heartbeat, I thought I was safe. Then one emerged, climbing the ice with impossible speed, claws gouging the frozen surface. Its eyes met mine. I screamed. I clawed out, slipping onto the bank. Blood mixed with snow. My body was near collapse. And then I saw it. The forest beyond, desolate, silent, impossibly vast. I realized I had no way to know if anyone else was alive, no way to know if I could survive. They weren't just hunting me. They were training me, teaching me the mountain, teaching me terror, teaching me that escape might be impossible. I ran, not knowing where, not knowing why, only moving. My mind fractured, memories bleeding into hallucinations. Snow and shadow twisted together. Whispers called my name from everywhere and nowhere. And yet somewhere deep, I held onto one thought. Survive, somehow survive. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, days. The world became a blur of snow, ice, and shadows. At some point I stopped. The forest was silent. No tracks, no breath, no sound. I collapsed to my knees, shaking uncontrollably, bloodied, broken. And I realized I had survived. For now. But behind me, in the deep shadows of the mountains, I could feel them. Watching, waiting, patient. And I knew this was far from over. The snow was quiet. At first I thought it was a gift, a reprieve, a fragile silence after days of horror, after endless running, bleeding, and clawing through ice and shadow. My body was broken, frozen fingertips, scraped shoulders, bloodied knees, but I had survived, somehow. I pressed my palms against the snow, tasting iron. My breath steamed in the cold, ragged gasps, echoing in the hollow valleys. The mountains were still. The wind whispered faintly, carrying the scent of pine and frost, but no predator followed. Or so I thought. I forced myself to rise, legs shaking like saplings in a storm. My shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. Every step was agony, each one a reminder of how close I had come to the edge of death. I moved cautiously, scanning the snow for tracks, for signs, for any hint that the Yetis had followed. The footprints were gone, or buried. The silence weighed on me, heavy and unnatural. My mind twisted memories and hallucinations together. I could see their shapes in the shadows, hear the whispers in the wind, smell blood where none existed. The mountain had become a living nightmare, one that might exist only in my mind, or perhaps it was real, too real. Hours or maybe days passed in a blur. My body moved on instinct. Snow crusted under my boots, eyes scanning every tree, every rock, every shadow. I avoided open spaces, hugging the cover of cliffs and dense forest. The memory of the cabin, the frozen bodies, the mutilated villagers, all burned in my skull. I was alone. And yet, I felt eyes on me. Everywhere. I stumbled into a small clearing, a frozen pond at its center. The ice reflected the gray sky above. I collapsed onto the snow, shivering uncontrollably, bleeding, broken, exhausted. My knife lay half buried in snow beside me. I pressed my fingers against it, feeling the cold metal bite through my frozen gloves. Then I saw it. Not the full creature, but a shadow. A dark form at the edge of the forest, half hidden, watching. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't blink. It wasn't running, it wasn't charging, it was patient. And I realized the horrifying truth. They weren't done with me. They never would be. I tried to stand. My legs refused. The creature or creatures didn't move. The mountain was silent except for my ragged breath and the faint crunch of ice beneath my boots. I shouted. No response. Only a distant crack, like a tree snapping under weight, or a scream too muffled to recognize as human. My stomach dropped. I realized the others had been here, or had been taken. The memory of the frozen corpses at the cabin, the impaled bodies along the slopes, all came rushing back. They were everywhere, always patient, always watching. And I was still their prey. The night fell, bruised and gray. The snow swirled around me in fine powder, stinging my skin, coating my hair. I felt eyes in every shadow, a presence just beyond the ice. I could hear distant footsteps, scraping, low growls, indistinct but unmistakably alive. I crouched low, knife clutched, teeth chattering, whispering my own name back at the mountains. I'm still here, I'm still here. The forest whispered in return. I don't know how long I wandered. Days, weeks, time had lost meaning. The mountains stretched endlessly, valleys twisting into impossibility. My wounds throbbed, hunger gnawed at me, and yet I survived. Somehow, the Yetis hadn't ended me. Or had they? Sometimes I thought I glimpsed them in the snow. Shadows crouched atop ridges, black eyes glinting, fur matted with ice and blood. Sometimes I heard the faint, deliberate snapping of branches in the distance, or a whisper of my name on the wind. I began to understand a terrifying truth. They weren't just creatures. They were eternal. They didn't hunt to kill. They hunted to ensure the terror lasted, to teach patience, to break the mind and the soul. And in this mountain wilderness, I would never be free. I reached a ridge and looked down at the valley below. The snow stretched endlessly, broken only by the jagged outline of cliffs and forests. My body was numb, my mind frayed. I realized then that I had survived not because I was clever, not because I was strong, but because they allowed it. And that was worse than death. I shouted into the wind, a scream of pain, of fear, of madness. It echoed against the mountains, fading into silence. I waited for the response. There was none. For a moment, I thought I was alone. Then the whisper came, soft but unmistakable. "Elliot." I froze. No shadow, no sound, just the wind carrying my name, stretching it across the mountains like a promise or a threat. I walked forward slowly, my boots crunching against frozen snow. Every step was agony, but I moved. I moved because I had to. Movement was survival, even if it was just a few steps at a time. The forest pressed closer. The mountains loomed. The snow whispered of corpses and broken minds. I understood now that the mountains were alive with their presence. The Yetis had become more than creatures. They were a force, patient, intelligent, and eternal. And I was trapped. Forever. I don't know if I will ever leave these mountains. Sometimes I think I can see a distant figure moving in the snow. Sometimes I hear whispers in the wind, the soft dragging of claws, the faint taste of iron in the air. My mind fractures between reality and hallucination. I do not know which is worse. I survived the mountain. I survived the hunt. But I am not free. And they are still there, waiting.